Does. But I write a kind of music which discovers a sound that has not yet been heard.
Artist George Brock once said, "As you become older, art and life become the same thing. What follows is a testimonial to that statement." The next half hour is called "I'm Too Busy to Talk Now, Conversations with American Artists Over 70. I'm Connie Goldman, and this is composer John Cage.
I use my work to open myself to the rest of life, rather than using my work to impose myself or to express myself to other people.
At age 74, John Cage radiates childlike charm and gentle wit. His life is a busy and active one, which includes travel, friends, avocations, and diversions, and of course, his continuing work. His home and studio are in a large Soho loft in New York City that he shares with choreographer Merce Cunningham. The place is furnished simply and is full of light that nourishes an indoor garden of hundreds of exotic plants. The central element in Cage's life remains his work. As a force in contemporary music, John Cage has a monumental stature. Yet his compositions and performances have often been considered eccentric and monotonous, but brilliant. It's been said that he has had a greater impact on world music than any other American composer of the 20th century. In Europe, his works are described as characteristically American, while here in America, his music is often labeled unlistenable or absurd. John Cage has his own logic.
I searched for another reason for making music than communicating my feelings. And I found it through an Indian musician who was disturbed over the effect that Western music was having on Indian music. And she studied Western music in a concentrated fashion for about 9 months here in New York. And she studied, among other teachers, she studied with me a survey of contemporary music and counterpoint. And I asked her what her teacher had said was the purpose of music. And she said to sober and quiet the mind, thus making it susceptible to divine influences. And Lou Harrison, another composer, was concerned about why he was writing music. And he found an English composer, Thomas Mace, I think in the 16th century, saying the purpose of music is to sober and quiet the mind, thus making it susceptible to divine influences. So coming from England and from India and from such different times, I decided to take that as the true answer rather than the one I had been taught, which was having an idea or having a feeling and expressing it.
Then there's been a great change in your whole creative process.
Yes.
And how you've gone about it.
Yes, and the central piece in that change is called The Music of Changes. The title is also derived from the ancient Chinese book in which you obtain the answer to a question by tossing 3 coins 6 times, or the yarrow sticks, which is called the Book of Changes, the I Ching. And when I found that book in the early 50s, I began almost immediately making a way of composing, which was through the use of chance operations, and I shifted my whole work from making choices to asking questions and then taking the answers that were provided by chance operations.
And you still compose in this manner, by chance, with the I Ching?
I do. And now I will go faster by means of the computer and word processor, because that works in the same way. All computer programming is basically question asking, rather than choice making.
Although most of the music you'll hear during this presentation is composed and performed by a musician influenced by Cage, what follows is a recording of Cage's own work, The Music of Changes. been many times during your career when people have written and spoken very negatively of your work. They've done everything from laugh at it to demean it to say it's worthless.
A friend of mine refers to my career as checkered.
I want you to...
Or would you call it entirely black?
Well, I guess I want to know what you'd call it. I want to know your reaction to their reaction.
Oh, I don't have any reaction to that. That is their business. I do what I do, and then people respond in the way that they do. I do notice that the numbers of people interested in my work has increased. In 1952, if I gave a concert, not more than 120 people would show up. But now if I give a concert, I can easily get between 2,000 and 4,000 people.
How do you protect yourself from what other people say? Or the fact that now many people think you're the most important person in American music?
No, I don't really do it that way. I remain a person who has not done anything. And the work that is finished is just work that has, so to speak, its life, which may live and may not.
So anything you create, anything you write, anything...
has its own life rather than my life. Has its life rather than my life.
And it's always a new beginning for you.
Right. So that I'm independent of my work. I wish it well, so to speak, but I'm concerned with the work that I haven't yet made. I'm not concerned with the work that I've finished.
One wonders in amazement what John Cage will produce next. His past works have incorporated such sounds as audio frequency oscillators, buzzers, gongs, fire sirens, whistles, and an element very important to Cage, the sound of silence. Composer Aaron Copland observes that Cage isn't interested in creating great eternal masterpieces, but in amusing himself on the highest level with new notions concerning music. John Cage would agree.
My father was an inventor, so that I grew up in the atmosphere of the necessity of having new ideas, of making discoveries. I knew from the beginning that the only thing I would be able to do that would be useful to the society as a whole would be to make some kind of discovery. That was my business, so to speak. But then I kept remembering my father, and he was alive then still, and still making new inventions in the field of electrical engineering and so on. And I thought I'll just put my mind to finding, if I can, something new in the field of music. And that's how the whole thing has continued. In other words, I've thought that rather than explaining things and making them clear, that it was best to provide people with something to experience. And the experience should be as new as going to a new country or as getting lost in the woods.
Is that how you feel now, or is that how you felt then when you were just beginning this?
It's more or less then and now. I remember a lady in Chicago saying, "Oh, when you get older, you'll mellow." And the suggestion was that I would get soft, and that I would become content more easily. And I wouldn't be looking for something so irritatingly new. But I don't think that's happened.
Maybe exactly the opposite has happened.
That I've gotten worse?
More adventurous. Always looking for something new, not content a bit.
Actually, rather than it's being one continuous line, I have more the feeling that there are certain years when I'm more active than in other years. I was very active in 1952. That was the year that I wrote the 433, which was the silent piece. Also the piece for 12 radios. And I finished The Music of Changes, which was the first piece written entirely with chance operations. And I think I finished the Williams mix then. The number of pieces that I wrote that year is quite astonishing, even in retrospect. I have the feeling that that happened this last year, too, which is, what is it? It's 30 years later. And I did a really astonishing amount of work. It was as though things were happening more fluently, or quickly and without any difficulty. A string quartet, a piece for organ, 8 pieces for oboe, a piece for percussion. I just finished 9 songs. And that's simply the amount of work since August.
With the passing years, John Cage has never lost his lighthearted approach. His friends consider him a serious man with a frolicsome touch. Subjects that he takes very seriously, such as his macrobiotic diet and general health care, are viewed with both concern and humor.
As I get older, I become more concerned about being healthy. And so, in one of my texts, I say, when I die, I'll be in perfect condition. Because for the first time in my life, my teeth will all be well fixed. There won't be any cavities and so forth. And everything else will be well. I'll simply die a natural death or through some accidental event.
Have you really changed your attitude towards your body and what it'll tolerate?
Well, I used to think that the mind and the spirit, so to speak, were superior to the body. But then a time came, I forget just when it was. I was on tour with the Cunningham Dance Company and we were in Venezuela, when I'd always had some trouble with my back. And this time I hurt my back so much that it was painful to do anything, to move, and I was crawling around on all fours, and yet I managed to stand up and bow at the end of a performance and so on. It was very difficult. Finally, I was helped by a doctor there who gave me a drug to take the pain away, and then he insisted that I do certain exercises. And he said by the time the drug wore off, if I did the exercises, I would have strengthened the muscles sufficiently, and that I should continue in my life doing exercises. Well, before I had never done any, but now I do them every day. What has happened is that I've seen that the body is part and parcel of the whole being, so that there isn't a split between the mind and the body. They both belong together. When I was younger, and I mistreated the body because I thought the mind was what I was really dealing with. But as I get older, I see that I'm really dealing quite straightforwardly with the body, and that I must keep it in good working order as long as I can.
Although Cage's reputation is primarily a result of his compositions, he also has a substantial reputation as an expert on mushrooms. But this is only one of many interests.
I generally have 2 or 3 projects going simultaneously, so that when one is finished, another one is continued. There's always something going on. And I find my interests as I get older multiply rather than get less in number. As you can see, I'm interested in indoor gardening, and I'm interested in cooking, macrobiotic cooking. And my latest new interest is the collection of rocks, where in all my travels I collect either small rocks, or if I have the facility, I get big ones. The ones behind you are quite heavy. I not only am interested in collecting them and having them in the garden, but I've turned them into the making of etchings and of drawings, and now into the composing of music, so that my songs are simply made by drawing around the rocks. Not all the way around, but because music goes from left to right, and you can't go backwards in music, but I draw a part of the rock.
How do these new interests come upon you?
Through circumstances, and through being open to the world, to the things that happen, rather than being closed through my intentions. So that as something new appears in my experience, I open the door to it rather than closing the door.
Historians and music critics would agree that John Cage's readiness to try new things has provided an original approach to music and a unique collection of writings and lectures. The direction of American dance in our time has also been affected by the Cage imagination. Among others, his music has profoundly influenced the presentations of the Merce Cunningham Dance Company, and his original thinking may also affect our views on aging.
I think that growing old in a happy way derives from not having been employed. So that I never had a job. I was self-employed, as my father was. He was an inventor. He never had a job either, and he was born in 1886. So that he was working the very day he died. He was having new ideas in relation to his invention in the morning, and then after lunch he lay down to rest, he told Mother, and she heard a strange sound and he was dead. But he was working the very day he died. There was no shift in his life from being employed to not being employed.
From being productive to being something else.
So that he was unemployed his whole life, which is to say he was self-employed throughout his life. I think that people who have jobs and who will eventually lose them should practice being self-employed while they're employed.
Explain how you would suggest they do that.
What I mean is that in self-employment is the secret of enjoying old age.
Talk some more about it, about what those attitudes are, or what that does for you.
That means that no matter how old you are, if you're self-employed, you will see each day as useful. The only reason that people accept jobs that are not interesting is in order to make money. In other words, they think that money is important and that life is not. What we need to do is to be willing to die for what gives us life. I knew that I loved music, and I was willing to die for it. So I didn't approach music as something that would make money for me. If I needed money, I then took a job that would make money, such as washing dishes or washing walls or distributing circulars for an advertising campaign or something like that. I never was well-to-do until after I was 50. Now I'm, you could say, well-to-do, but it's because I've written so many books and written so much music that royalties are sufficient to keep me going.
If you must work at a routine job to make a living and expect to be, as you say, retired at a certain age or a certain stage, how do you learn to keep alive some kind of creativity?
Most people will have to do it themselves. Everyone who went to school learned how to read and write. Therefore, I have the idea that everyone is a poet. So you could spend your life writing poetry. And you could begin while you were employed, say, as a secretary or as a computer programmer. You could each day put aside a little time in which you employed yourself to be a poet. Then when you lost your job or were retired, you would know that you could go on writing poetry.
What might you say to an older person that hasn't had this kind of orientation to life, that has had a life of work or a harder life, and now is living in their own kind of isolation because society doesn't want them anymore? What might you say to them? Maybe you could say something that would make them look inward and find...
I would suggest that they write a poem so that they could read it to their friends the next day. Write a poem for each day. Why not? And if they don't like to write poetry or don't like to write music, could try making a drawing. My drawings are made by drawing around the stones that I collect. I don't have to know how to draw. The rock teaches me where to put the pencil. I think many people think that art is something mysterious that only belongs to certain people, whereas everyone has access to it. I had a walk once with Mark Tobey. He was a great artist, and it was in Seattle. I was married then to Ksenia, and we walked very slowly because Mark Tobey was constantly seeing something that he wanted to point out, and it wasn't something like a mountain. It was more something like cracks in the pavement or something on the wall of a house where something had fallen off. But his eye was absolutely open constantly to the world around him. And I think that walk not only helped my seeing, but I shifted it over also to my hearing, so that I listen all the time to the sounds of the environment wherever I am. And this year, in contrast to previous years of my life, I'm beginning to hear the constant sounds, like the sound of that humidifier that I used to ignore in order to hear, say, the more changing sound of the traffic. And most people would ignore the traffic in order to hear a little music. But now I'm beginning to be interested in the humidifier and the refrigerator when it makes a sound, and any other thing which has a kind of constant and for most people irritating sound. But those sounds are beginning to define the space for me, so that I know through those sounds the nature of the space that I'm living in. And it's giving me a great deal of pleasure, because those were the sounds which I didn't really accept, which I tried to ignore. And now, more and more, I don't hear anything without enjoying hearing it, including those constant utilitarian sounds. If you can enjoy the worst things, then the rest is easy. I can make that, I think, clearer by saying this. You remember earlier in our conversation I spoke of the Indian reason for making music was to sober and quiet the mind, thus making it susceptible to divine influences. Well, first, what is the sober and quiet mind? And I decided that I wouldn't think of a sober and quiet mind as being one which required being in a sober and quiet place. I knew that in the 20th century we had to be able to live in New York City. So I thought a sober and quiet mind in this day and age will have to be sober and quiet in a noisy situation. And it's that has been my guiding principles, so that finally those noises, and now even these constant ones, strike me as being divine influences. Because we become quiet in our minds, that is to say, free of our likes and dislikes, in order to receive whatever the environment gives us as something good.
Is there something you think creative in everybody?
Well, if there isn't, there ought to be. If you go to sleep, you wake up with energy. And you either use that energy yourself in terms of self-employment, or you use the energy in relation to someone who tells you what to do. If someone is telling you what to do, then I'm advising you to supplement that with telling yourself something to do. So that when they stop telling you what to do, you will then be able to go on telling yourself what to do.
John Cage, composer, author, and as one perceptive friend called him, a visionary who has a dream. A man filled with childlike wonder, yet a man as pragmatic as any Yankee tinkerer. I'm Connie Goldman, and this has been I'm Too Busy to Talk Now, Conversations with American Artists Over 70. This program was made possible by grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and Norman Lear. The associate producer for this program was John Weber. Music was composed and performed by Tim Eierman and Bruce Harrison. The presenting public radio station for the series is WHA, Wisconsin Public Radio. To purchase a cassette copy of this conversation with John Cage, or for information on obtaining other programs in the I'm Too Busy to Talk Now series, call this toll-free number, 1-800-262-6243, Department AP. Again, that's 1-800-262-6243, Department AP.
Producer Connie Goldman taped this interview with John Cage in the mid-'80s, and we aired it today as a special tribute to mark the recent death of this artistic and musical genius. You're listening to Newsstand on KCRW Santa Monica. Tomorrow at 12:25 on Real Politics, Harold Meyerson, executive editor of LA Weekly, discusses the political fallout of the California budget debacle. His guest will be Bill Bradley, editor of the political newspaper